The morning sun peeked through Emily Dawson's bedroom window, casting golden light onto the neatly arranged desk beside her bed. On the desk sat her most prized possession, a small pink notebook covered in tiny heart stickers. It wasn't just any notebook. This was where she had carefully written down every dollar she had saved from her job at the cafe, every shift she worked, every tip she collected, every moment she resisted the urge to buy something unnecessary. It was all recorded here. Today was the day it would finally pay off. Emily took a deep breath and smoothed out the pages, her eyes scanning over the total at the bottom. She had saved enough to open her very first bank account. It wasn't just about the money, it was about independence. She wanted to manage her finances like everyone else, to prove that she could take care of herself. She had practiced this moment in front of the mirror, even rehearsing how she would speak to the teller. Her mother had offered to go with her, but Emily insisted on doing it alone. She wanted to show the world, and herself, that she was just as capable as anyone else. She carefully zipped her savings into a small pouch and placed it in her purse. Taking one final look at herself in the mirror, she straightened her blouse and fixed her hair. "You got this, Emily," she whispered to herself, smiling. The bank was just a short walk from her house, and as she approached the glass doors, her heart pounded with excitement. The lobby was sleek and modern, filled with well-dressed customers and tellers working behind polished counters. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, gripping her purse tightly. The cold air conditioning sent a small shiver down her spine, but she squared her shoulders and approached the line. As she waited, she noticed how efficiently the employees moved. They smiled at the wealthier-looking customers, nodding eagerly as they helped them. A man in a suit was being assisted with great enthusiasm, the teller laughing at his jokes and making polite conversation. Emily hoped for the same kind of service. She wasn't asking for special treatment, just kindness. When it was finally her turn, she stepped forward with a bright smile. "Hi, I'd like to open a savings account, please." Brittany Stanton, the teller, barely glanced at her before sighing heavily, as if Emily had just interrupted something far more important. She was tall, with sleek blonde hair and cold, calculating eyes. Her name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone dry and uninterested. Emily shook her head. "No, but I read online that I could walk in and open an account today." Brittany raised an eyebrow, finally giving Emily a full look. The way she scanned her from head to toe made Emily shift uncomfortably. "And you're opening this account for yourself?" Emily nodded eagerly. "Yes, I've been saving up from my job and I want to keep my money safe." She reached into her purse to retrieve her pouch, her hands steady despite the uncomfortable silence that had settled between them. Brittany let out a small, almost amused chuckle. "I see," she said, tapping her nails against the desk. "Well, managing a bank account isn't as simple as you think. Are you sure you're ready for something like this?" Emily felt her stomach drop. I know how to save. I've been keeping track of my money," she insisted, pulling out her notebook. "Look, I wrote down everything. I made sure I had enough to open the account." Brittany didn't even glance at it. Instead, she turned slightly and whispered something to a coworker behind her who snickered. Emily's heart sank. "I'm not sure this is the best place for you to open an account," Brittany said, still smirking. "Maybe try a credit union. They handle simpler cases." Emily's chest tightened, the weight of humiliation pressing down on her. She glanced around, realizing that a few people in the line behind her were now watching. Some looked at her with mild curiosity, others with open amusement. One woman whispered to the person beside her, shaking her head. Emily swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. "I just want to open an account. Isn't that what banks are for?" Brittany sighed dramatically, as if she had been asked to perform the most exhausting task of her life. "Let me get my manager," she muttered before walking away, shaking her head. Emily stood there, her cheeks burning. She felt small, like she didn't belong. Across the room, sitting quietly in one of the lounge chairs, Keanu Reeves had been watching the entire interaction. He had come to the bank for personal business, but something about Emily had caught his attention the moment she walked in. He admired the way she had carried herself, her quiet determination. And now he watched as that confidence was being chipped away by the very people who were supposed to help her. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes locked onto Brittany as she whispered with the manager, Greg Morgan. Greg, a stocky man in an expensive suit, glanced at Emily and frowned, nodding slightly before making his way toward her. Greg approached with a fake, professional smile. "Miss, I understand you'd like to open an account, but we have certain procedures in place to ensure our clients can manage their finances properly. Are you sure you have all the necessary information?" Emily clutched her notebook. Yes, I have everything. I checked the website. I even practiced what I was going to say. Greg sighed, rubbing his temples like she was wasting his time. Look, we're just trying to make sure you're ready for this responsibility. A bank account isn't just a piggy bank, you know? A few customers chuckled nearby. Emily felt a lump form in her throat, but she refused to cry. She refused to let them make her feel small. Just then, Keanu stood up. He took his time walking over, his presence immediately commanding attention. The customers around him shifted, recognizing his face but unsure if they should say anything. Keanu ignored them. His focus was on Emily. He stepped beside her, turning to Greg and Brittany with a calm yet firm expression. Is there a problem here? His voice was quiet, but the weight behind it made the entire bank fall silent. Brittany's mouth opened slightly, her eyes darting between him and Greg. Greg stiffened. Sir, this is a private discussion. Keanu held up a hand, cutting him off. I don't think so. What I just saw wasn't a discussion, it was discrimination. Emily looked up at him, eyes wide. She had recognized him the moment he walked up, but she was too overwhelmed to react. Keanu turned back to Greg. Now, you're going to explain, very clearly, why this young woman can't open an account. Greg's face turned red. Brittany looked like she wanted to disappear. The entire bank was watching now. Emily, still shaken, felt something shift inside her. For the first time since she walked in, she wasn't alone. And for the first time, Greg and Brittany looked nervous. A thick silence fell over the bank as all eyes locked onto Keanu Reeves. The weight of his words hung in the air, thick with quiet intensity. Brittany's face paled, her smirk vanishing like a gust of wind had swept it away. Greg Morgan shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat as he adjusted his tie. The sudden shift in power was evident. The people they had just mocked were no longer standing alone. A hut. Emily, still gripping her notebook, stared at Keanu in awe. She had recognized him immediately, but she hadn't expected him to step in like this. She had been so used to people ignoring situations like hers, pretending not to notice the mistreatment, the subtle exclusion, the way people like Brittany and Greg saw her as less than. But here he was, standing next to her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Greg forced a smile, though it wavered under Keanu's sharp gaze. Mr. Reeves, he started, his voice filled with strained politeness. This is just a simple misunderstanding. We have certain protocols in place to ensure that our customers are prepared to handle a bank account responsibly. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. You mean like the well-dressed man you assisted earlier without questioning? Or the woman with the designer handbag who didn't have to explain herself? His tone was cool, calculated. He wasn't raising his voice, but somehow it felt as if he was speaking louder than anyone else in the room. Brittany opened her mouth to interject, but Keanu turned his gaze toward her. I watched you belittle this young woman the moment she stepped up to your counter. I saw the way you dismissed her, whispered to your coworker and laughed at her, and now, when she asks for something as simple as a bank account, a service you provide to hundreds of people every day, you suddenly have concerns about her capabilities? He crossed his arms. You think I didn't see that? Brittany visibly flinched, her hands gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She struggled to find words, but nothing came out. Greg let out a nervous chuckle, though there was no humor in it. Look, Mr. Reeves, we follow standard procedures for all clients. If Miss Dawson... Keanu held up a hand, stopping him cold. Did she fail to provide the required documents? Greg hesitated. Well, no, but... Did she say or do anything that suggested she was incapable of managing her finances? Keanu pressed. Brittany's lips parted, but no answer came. Keanu took a step closer, his calm voice carrying a weight that made the room feel even smaller. Then tell me, Greg, he said, his gaze unwavering, why was she treated differently? The room was silent, the tension was suffocating. Greg's jaw clenched as he realized there was no escape. The eyes of every customer, every employee were fixed on him. The bank had never been this quiet before. Keanu turned back to Emily, his expression softening slightly. Miss Dawson, he said gently, do you still want to open your account? Emily, who had been frozen in place, slowly nodded. Yes, her voice was quiet but firm. Keanu's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile before he turned back to Greg. Then I suggest you get started. For a moment Greg looked as though he wanted to argue, but then he saw the way Keanu was looking at him. This wasn't a negotiation, this was a demand. Greg forced a tight smile. Brittany, he said through clenched teeth, process the account. Brittany hesitated, but under Greg's sharp glare and Keanu's silent presence, she turned back to her computer. "Fine," she muttered, typing begrudgingly. "I just need an ID." Emily quickly pulled out her ID and placed it on the counter. Brittany took it without another word, her fingers moving stiffly over the keyboard as she began entering Emily's information. The entire bank was still watching, the once apathetic bystanders now fully engaged. As Brittany worked, Keanu leaned slightly toward Emily, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You okay?" Emily exhaled, gripping her notebook a little tighter before looking up at him. "Yeah," she said, her voice steadier this time. "Thank you." Keanu gave her a knowing nod. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You deserve respect. That's not something you should have to fight for." Emily swallowed hard, those words sinking deep into her heart. After a few moments of tense silence, Brittany pushed a stack of forms toward Emily. "Sign here," she said curtly. Emily took the pen and signed her name carefully, her hands shaking slightly, not from nerves but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about opening a bank account anymore, it was about proving that she belonged. Brittany snatched the papers back, checked them over, and then, finally, handed Emily a receipt and a small folder. "Your account is open," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. Emily took the folder and held it close. She had done it. Keanu straightened and looked at Greg one last time. "I hope you take a long, hard look at what happened here today," he said, his voice calm but unmistakably firm, "because the way you treat people, it matters. And if this is how you run your bank, you've got bigger problems than just bad customer service." Greg's face burned red with shame. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Keanu turned back to Emily. "Come on," he said with a small smile. "I think we're done here." As Emily followed him toward the exit, she felt the weight of the bank's eyes still on her, but this time she didn't feel small, she didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful. The automatic doors slid open, and as the fresh air hit her face, Emily realized something. She had walked into that bank expecting to fight for something that should have already been hers. She had expected resistance, humiliation, and another reminder that the world didn't always see her the way she saw herself. But she had walked out with more than just a bank account. She had walked out knowing that she was worthy, that her voice mattered, that she wasn't alone. And most importantly, that she would never again let anyone make her feel otherwise. The crisp air outside the bank felt like a relief, as if stepping away from the suffocating weight of the moment inside. Emily clutched the small folder in her hands, her heart still racing from everything that had just happened. She turned to Keanu, who walked beside her with an easy, calm stride, as if standing up to injustice was just another part of his day. They reached a quiet bench a few feet away from the entrance. Keanu gestured toward it. "Want to sit for a moment?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, sinking into the bench, her grip still tight around her folder. She stared down at it for a moment, tracing the embossed letters with her fingertips. This was something she had worked for, something she had earned, and yet, it had almost been taken away simply because of how others saw her. Keanu studied her carefully, waiting. He could tell her mind was still spinning, her emotions tangled between triumph and exhaustion. "You did good in there," he finally said, breaking the silence. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I didn't feel like I did good," she admitted. "I felt small and angry and like I shouldn't have had to fight for this." She looked up at him, frustration flickering in her eyes. "Why do people have to make everything so hard?" Keanu sighed, leaning back on the bench. "Because sometimes, people get too comfortable with the way things are. They don't question their own biases, don't challenge their own beliefs. It's easier to stick with what they know, even if it's wrong." He glanced toward the bank. "But today, they got challenged, and they won't forget it." Emily frowned. "I don't want to just be someone they remember for a bad reason. I don't want to be the girl they almost didn't let open an account. I just want people to see me like anyone else." Keanu turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice steady. "Respect isn't something you should have to beg for. It's not a privilege, it's a right. You didn't walk in there asking for a favor. You walked in expecting to be treated fairly the way anyone else would be, and that's exactly what you deserved." Emily swallowed hard, his words sinking into her chest like stones in a pond. It didn't feel like it, though. It felt like they were ready to just push me aside, like I wasn't worth the trouble. Keanu nodded as if he understood that feeling all too well. Some people will always try to make you feel that way, he admitted. But that doesn't mean you let them win. You keep walking in, you keep showing up, and you keep proving them wrong, and trust me, you did that today. Emily looked down at her hands, gripping the folder like it was more than just paperwork, like it was a symbol of something bigger, a quiet victory, a mark of her place in the world. A sudden voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me?" Emily and Keanu both turned toward the sound. A woman, maybe in her late 50s, stood a few feet away, her expression hesitant but sincere. She wore a blue blazer and held a purse close to her chest. Emily recognized her from the bank. She had been standing in line watching the entire incident unfold. "I just wanted to say," the woman continued, stepping closer, "I was in there, I saw what happened, and I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry." Her voice wavered slightly, but there was honesty in her words. "That wasn't right, the way they treated you, and I just wanted you to know that not everyone sees you the way they did." Emily blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected anyone to come forward. Keanu nodded at the woman, his expression encouraging. "Thank you for saying that," he said. The woman nodded back, then turned to Emily. "You deserved better in there," she said softly, "and I hope you know that." Emily wasn't sure what to say. A small part of her had assumed that everyone in the bank had just been silent bystanders, indifferent to what was happening, but maybe some of them had been afraid to speak, just like she had once been. "Thank you," Emily finally said, her voice quieter than before. The woman gave her a gentle smile before turning and walking away, disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Emily turned to Keanu. "I didn't expect that," she admitted. Keanu smiled knowingly. Sometimes, all it takes is one person standing up to make others realize they should have done the same. Emily let those words settle in her mind. She had never seen herself as someone who could spark change. She had just wanted to be treated fairly, but maybe standing up for herself had done more than just open her own bank account. Maybe it had made someone else rethink their silence, their inaction. A comfortable silence stretched between them for a moment before Keanu spoke again. "So," he said, nodding toward the folder in her hands, "what's the first thing you're going to save up for?" Emily blinked, caught off guard by the question. She hadn't thought about that, not really. "Well," she hesitated, then let out a small laugh. "There's this trip I've been wanting to take. I've never been out of state before, and I thought it'd be cool to go somewhere new." Keanu grinned. "That sounds like a great plan." Emily smiled down at the folder, feeling something unfamiliar but welcome bubbling up in her chest: hope. For the first time in a long time, she felt like the world wasn't as impossible as it seemed. And she had a feeling this was just the beginning. The rest of the day felt like a blur, but in the best way possible. Emily held onto her folder as if it were a treasure map, a symbol of her victory. She had stepped into that bank expecting a normal day, maybe even a moment of celebration for finally opening her own account, but instead she had been tested. And she had won, not just because Keanu Reeves had stepped in, but because she had stood her ground, refused to be dismissed, and proven that she deserved the same respect as anyone else. As she walked home, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. The crisp autumn air brushed against her cheeks, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to walk quickly, keeping her head down. Instead, she took her time, breathing it all in. When she reached her small apartment, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a pile of mail. Her mother, Maria Dawson, was a kind but overprotective woman who had spent years worrying about Emily's future. Every small step toward independence had been a battle, not because Maria didn't believe in her, but because the world had constantly shown her how cruel it could be. Maria looked up as Emily walked in. "Hey, sweetheart, you're home later than usual. Everything okay?" Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain everything that had happened. Then she smiled, holding up the folder. "I did it, Mom. I opened my savings account today." Maria's eyes widened and she immediately stood, rushing over to hug her daughter. "Mija, that's amazing," she said, squeezing her tight. "I'm so proud of you." Emily melted into the hug, feeling a deep warmth settle in her chest. "Thanks, Mom," she murmured. Maria pulled back slightly, looking down at the folder. "So how did it go? Was it easy?" Emily paused, debating whether to tell her mother the full truth. She didn't want to worry her, but at the same time, she didn't want to hide what she had been through. Taking a deep breath, she walked over to the kitchen table and sat down, motioning for her mom to join her. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "Actually, it was really hard. They didn't want to help me. They talked down to me like I wasn't smart enough to understand how banking worked." Maria's smile faded, her expression darkening. They what? Emily held up a hand, trying to calm her before she spiraled into full-on protective mom mode. It's okay, Mom, really, I handled it, and… She hesitated, then smiled. I had some help. Maria narrowed her eyes suspiciously. What kind of help? Emily chuckled. You're not going to believe this, but Keanu Reeves was at the bank. Maria blinked. Keanu Reeves? Yep. The actor? Maria stared at her daughter, her expression unreadable. Then she suddenly burst out laughing, shaking her head. Oh, now I know you're messing with me. Emily grinned. I'm serious, Mom. He was there, and he saw what was happening, and he stood up for me. He told them they were wrong and made sure I got my account. Maria's laughter faded as she saw the sincerity in her daughter's eyes. Wait, you're serious? 100%. Maria sat back, absorbing the information. Keanu Reeves defended you at a bank? Emily nodded. And it wasn't just about me, it was about how people like me get treated all the time. He said respect isn't something I should have to fight for, it should be a given. Maria exhaled, shaking her head. That man is a gift to this world. Emily laughed. Yeah, he really is. Her mother leaned forward, taking her hands in hers. Mija, I know how hard it is to deal with people who underestimate you. I've seen it your whole life, and it makes me so mad because they don't know how incredible you are. But I also know you've never let them stop you before, and you're not going to start now. Emily squeezed her mother's hands. I know, Mom, and today made me realize that I don't have to let them win, I can stand up for myself. Maria smiled proudly. That's my girl. A comfortable silence stretched between them for a moment before Maria asked, So, what's the first thing you're saving for? Emily grinned. A trip. I want to travel, see new places. I don't know where yet, but I want to go somewhere I've never been before. Maria's eyes softened. I think that's a wonderful idea. Later that evening, as Emily sat in her room, she opened her notebook where she had kept track of her savings goals. She wrote a new entry at the top of the page. Travel fund, because the world is mine to explore. She tapped her pen against the paper, smiling. For the first time, she truly believed it. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling lighter than she had in a long time. The sun streamed through her curtains, and for once she didn't feel like she had to rush to prove herself to the world. She had done that yesterday. She had won. As she got ready for the day, she glanced at her notebook again, smiling at the words she had written the night before. The world is mine to explore. The thought filled her with excitement, but it also made her realize something. This was just the beginning. After breakfast, Emily headed to work at the small cafe where she had been employed for over a year. It wasn't glamorous, but she loved it. The customers were kind, and she had built strong friendships with her co-workers. As she walked in, her best friend and co-worker, Lisa, waved her over with wide eyes. Okay, spill, Lisa demanded, barely letting Emily put her bag down. I saw the news this morning. Was that really Keanu Reeves at the bank with you? Emily laughed, shaking her head. You guys don't waste time, do you? Are you kidding? Lisa scoffed. Half the internet is talking about it. Some lady recorded part of what happened and posted it online. It's already got thousands of views. Emily's stomach dropped. Wait, someone filmed it? Lisa pulled out her phone and tapped the screen a few times before turning it toward Emily. See for yourself. Emily took the phone hesitantly and pressed play. The grainy video showed the bank, and there she was, standing at the counter, clutching her notebook, trying to remain composed as Brittany, the rude teller, dismissed her. The audio was slightly muffled, but it was clear enough to hear Brittany's condescending tone. Miss, I'm telling you this is a professional institution. If you don't have someone responsible with you, I can't open an account for you. Then, Keanu's voice cut in, calm but firm. And what exactly makes you think she's not responsible? Emily watched, transfixed, as the video captured the exact moment the atmosphere in the bank shifted. It was surreal seeing herself from an outside perspective. She had felt small in that moment, but looking at it now, she didn't see weakness. She saw a woman standing up for herself. The video ended just after Keanu forced Brittany and Greg, the bank manager, to acknowledge their mistreatment. Emily handed Lisa's phone back, taking a deep breath. Wow. I didn't realize someone was recording. Lisa grinned. You're kind of famous now. People in the comments are totally on your side. Some are even saying the bank should fire that teller. Emily frowned. I don't want anyone to lose their job. I just wanted to be treated like everyone else. And that's exactly why people love you, Lisa pointed out. You didn't demand anything, you just wanted respect, and Keanu saw that. Emily nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess he did. As the day went on, customers who recognized her from the video approached her with smiles and words of encouragement. Some even left bigger tips, saying they admired her bravery. "You're an inspiration," one woman said, handing Emily a folded bill with her receipt. "My niece has Down syndrome and I hope she grows up to be as strong as you." Emily's heart swelled. This was bigger than just her. If her story helped others feel seen, then maybe everything that had happened wasn't just about one bad day at the bank. It was about change. Later that evening, Emily and Lisa sat outside the cafe on their break, sipping coffee as the sun began to set. "You know," Lisa said, tapping her cup thoughtfully, "I think this is just the start for you." Emily raised an eyebrow. "The start of what?" "Of people seeing you for who you really are, not just as someone with Down syndrome, but as a person who's capable, strong, and independent." Emily smiled, looking up at the sky as a breeze passed through. "I like the sound of that." She took another sip of her coffee, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the drink. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Emily woke up to a flood of notifications on her phone. Messages from friends, comments on social media, and even emails from strangers all filled her screen. She scrolled through them, her heart pounding as she read words of support, admiration, and encouragement. "You are amazing. Your strength inspired me today. I showed the video to my son who has Down syndrome. He finally saw someone like him standing up for themselves. Thank you. The bank should be ashamed of how they treated you, but you handled it with so much grace. You're a role model." Emily blinked away the sudden emotion in her eyes. She had never thought of herself as an inspiration. She had just wanted to open a bank account. But somehow that simple act had resonated with people in ways she never imagined. Her mom knocked on the door, peeking in. "Morning, sweetheart, I made breakfast. You should eat before you go to work." Emily smiled. "Thanks, Mom, but can we talk first?" Her mother sat beside her on the bed, concern etched on her face. "Of course, honey, what's wrong?" Emily took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I feel different. Yesterday, when everything happened at the bank, I felt small, like I didn't belong. But now I feel like I do belong. Like maybe I have a voice that people want to hear." Her mother took her hands, squeezing them gently. "You do belong, Emily. You always have. People just needed to see what I've known all along, that you are strong, capable, and deserving of respect." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with warmth. "Then I think I want to do something about it. I don't want to just be a story people talk about online. I want to help make things better for people like me." Her mother smiled proudly. "And how do you plan to do that?" Emily hesitated for only a second before she answered. "I want to talk to the bank. I want to meet with them, not just to make sure things change for me, but for others too." Her mom beamed. "That's my girl. Let's make it happen." That afternoon, Emily walked back into the same bank where she had been humiliated just days before. But this time, she wasn't alone. A news reporter had contacted her earlier asking for an interview, and she had agreed, on the condition that they come with her to the bank to document the follow-up. As she entered, Brittany, the bank teller who had dismissed her before, stiffened behind the counter. Greg, the bank manager, spotted Emily and the reporter and immediately rushed forward, his face pale. "Miss Dawson," Greg began, forcing a nervous smile, We weren't expecting you." Emily met his gaze steadily. "I came to talk." Greg glanced at the camera crew behind her, swallowing hard. "Of course, let's go to my office." Once inside, Emily sat across from Greg, the reporter sitting beside her. Greg wrung his hands nervously. "Listen, I just want to say we sincerely apologize for how you were treated the other day. We've already spoken to our staff about the importance of proper customer service." Emily nodded, but she wasn't here just for an apology. "That's good, but an apology isn't enough. I want to know what steps this bank is taking to make sure people with disabilities are treated fairly." Greg blinked, caught off guard. Well, we do have policies." "Then why weren't they followed?" Emily interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "If Keanu Reeves hadn't stepped in, would anything have changed?" Greg had no answer. His silence spoke volumes. Emily continued, "I don't want anyone else to experience what I did, so I'm asking you, what are you actually going to do to fix this?" The reporter leaned in. "That's a fair question, Mr. Morgan. What steps will the bank take to ensure equal treatment for all customers?" Greg squirmed under the scrutiny. Finally, he sighed. We will be implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all staff. We will also revise our policies to ensure accessibility and inclusivity are prioritized. Emily didn't back down. And how will customers know about these changes? Greg exhaled sharply, clearly flustered, but he nodded. We will publicly announce our commitment to inclusion and equity. And Miss Dawson, if you'd be willing, we'd like to invite you to consult with us on making these changes. Emily's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected that. You mean, you want my input? Greg gave a tight smile. Yes, we'd like to work with you to ensure we do better. Emily glanced at the reporter, who looked equally impressed. She turned back to Greg and nodded. Then I'll do it, but I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for the next person who walks through that door and deserves to be treated with respect. Greg nodded solemnly. Understood. As Emily left the office, she felt lighter. She had come here to demand change, and she had gotten it. She had used her voice, and people had listened. Outside, the reporter smiled. Ms. Dawson, I think you're going to inspire a lot of people. Emily smiled back. I hope so. As she walked down the street, she pulled out her notebook and wrote a single sentence. This is just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Emily's life changed in ways she had never expected. The interview she had given at the bank went viral, spreading across social media, news platforms, and disability advocacy groups. Messages of support continued to flood in, not just from people in her community, but from individuals all over the world. People shared their own stories of discrimination, some thanking her for standing up when they hadn't felt strong enough to do the same. The biggest surprise came when she received a call from a well-known disability rights organization. A woman named Dr. Caroline Vasquez, an advocate for inclusivity in financial institutions, wanted to meet her. Emily, Dr. Vasquez said warmly over the phone, what you did at that bank was powerful. We need voices like yours. Would you be willing to join us in advocating for financial accessibility reform? Emily was speechless for a moment. Me, she finally managed to say, I just wanted to open a bank account. Dr. Vasquez chuckled. And in doing so, you exposed a much bigger issue. You have the ability to make real change. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. A few weeks ago, she had been humiliated in a bank. Now, people were looking to her as a leader. I'd love to help, she said, barely believing the words coming out of her mouth. That evening, she sat on the couch with her mother, telling her about the call. Her mother beamed with pride. Emily, this is what happens when you stand up for what's right. You're making a difference. Emily nodded slowly. It's funny. I used to think that if I just stayed quiet and did my own thing, life would be easier. But now, I feel like my voice actually matters. Her mother took her hand. It always mattered, sweetheart. The world is just finally catching up. The next day, Emily returned to the bank, not as a customer this time, but as a consultant. She had agreed to work with the bank's leadership team to ensure that people with disabilities were treated fairly. She wasn't alone either. Dr. Vasquez and her organization had sent representatives to sit in on the meeting. As she walked through the bank, she noticed Brittany, the teller who had humiliated her, standing behind the counter. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Brittany quickly looked away, guilt evident on her face. Emily could tell that the news of what had happened had reached every corner of the bank. The air felt different, more cautious, more careful. Greg Morgan, the bank manager, greeted her with a tight but respectful smile. Miss Dawson, thank you for coming back. Emily nodded, keeping her composure. I'm here to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. The meeting took place in a large conference room where Greg, senior bank officials, and Dr. Vasquez sat across from Emily. Greg cleared his throat. We've reviewed our policies and we acknowledge that we have failed in ensuring a welcoming environment for all customers. Effective immediately, we will be implementing sensitivity training, revising our policies regarding accessibility, and improving our customer service practices. Emily listened carefully, then took a deep breath. That's a good start, but policies don't mean anything unless your employees actually believe in them. People like Brittany didn't treat me that way because she didn't know the rules. She treated me that way because she thought she could. How are you going to change the culture here? The room fell silent. Dr. Vasquez smiled approvingly, nodding at Emily's words. Greg sighed. You're right. Policies alone won't fix what happened. That's why we're going to ensure ongoing education, not just a one-time training. And as part of our commitment, we'd like to work with you and the Disability Rights Organization to develop training programs based on real experiences like yours. Emily glanced at Dr. Vasquez, who gave her an encouraging nod. She turned back to Greg. I'm willing to help, but only if this isn't just a PR move. I need to know that you're serious about this." Greg's face turned slightly red, but he nodded. "We are." Emily leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "Then let's get to work." Later that evening, Emily sat at the cafe where she worked, sipping a cup of hot chocolate during her break. The world outside felt different now, brighter, more open. She wasn't just a barista. She wasn't just a customer who had been mistreated at a bank. She was someone who had taken a stand, and people had listened. Her coworker Jonah slid into the seat across from her. "So, how does it feel being famous?" Emily chuckled. "I don't feel famous. I just feel like me." Jonas smirked. "Well, just you is making a lot of people think twice about how they treat others. That's pretty awesome." Emily smiled. "I guess it is." As she finished her drink, she pulled out her notebook, the same one she had used to track her savings goals, but now she flipped to a new page. She wrote one sentence. "This is only the beginning." Emily woke up that morning with a different sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just thinking about the next step for herself, she was thinking about what she could do for others. After everything that had happened, she had become a voice for people who had been ignored, mistreated, and underestimated for far too long. Today she would be making her first official visit as an advocate to discuss real changes in financial institutions. As she got ready, she flipped through her old notebook, the very same one where she had once written down her savings goals, meticulously tracking every dollar she earned at the cafe, the same notebook she had nervously clutched in her hands on the day she walked into the bank only to be humiliated. But today, she wasn't nervous. She had proven something to herself, and to the world. Her mother walked into the room, watching her carefully. "You ready for today?" Emily nodded, slipping the notebook into her bag. More than ever. Later that morning, Emily arrived at a grand financial summit in the city where top executives from multiple banks had gathered. She had been invited to speak alongside Dr. Vasquez and other advocates. As she entered the conference hall, she was met with curious glances, some impressed, some skeptical, and some who still underestimated her. But Emily had learned something important. People's opinions didn't define her, she defined herself. As she stepped onto the stage, the moderator introduced her. "Today, we have a very special guest, a young woman who, despite facing discrimination firsthand, chose to turn her experience into a movement for change. Please welcome Emily Dawson." Applause filled the room as Emily approached the microphone. She took a deep breath, looking out at the crowd, and began to speak. "I never expected to be standing here. A few months ago, I was just a girl working at a cafe, saving up my money, hoping to open a bank account like everyone else. But when I walked into that bank, I wasn't treated like a customer. I was treated like a problem, someone who didn't belong, someone who wasn't capable enough to handle their own finances." The room fell silent. Every eye was on her. She continued, "I could have walked away, I could have let that moment define me, but instead I chose to stand up for myself. Because I realized something, no one should have to fight for basic respect." She paused, letting her words settle. For too long, people with disabilities have been ignored, dismissed, and underestimated. But we are here, we are capable, and we deserve to be treated with dignity. Dr. Vasquez, seated in the front row, gave her a proud nod. Emily looked around the room, making sure to meet the eyes of every executive present. "That's why I'm here today, to ensure that no one else has to go through what I did. To make sure that the next time someone like me walks into a bank, they are welcomed, not questioned." The applause was louder this time. After the event, several bank executives approached Emily, eager to discuss ways to implement the changes she had proposed. One of them, an older man with silver hair, shook her hand firmly. "Miss Dawson, your story is exactly what we needed to hear. I'll be making sure our training programs reflect what you've shared with us today." Another woman, the CEO of a major bank, added, "I'd like to work with you directly, Emily. We want to create programs that encourage independence for customers with disabilities." Emily exchanged looks with Dr. Vasquez, who smiled. "Told you, you're making waves." As they left the venue, Emily's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced down. It was from Keanu Reeves. "Keanu, saw your speech, proud of you, told you your voice mattered. Keep going." Emily grinned, her heart swelling with gratitude. She typed back a quick response. "Emily, thank you for believing in me. This is only the beginning." That evening, Emily returned to the cafe for a quiet moment to herself. As she sipped her hot chocolate, Jonah slid into the seat across from her, grinning. "So, you're famous now. How's it feel to be a celebrity?" Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "I'm not a celebrity, I just spoke up." Jonah chuckled. "And now people are actually listening." Emily smiled, tapping her fingers on the table. Yeah, and that's the best part. As she walked home that night, she felt lighter than ever. The road ahead was still long, but she was no longer afraid to walk it. She had fought for herself, and now she was ready to fight for others. Because respect wasn't a privilege, it was a right. And she would make sure the world never forgot that. If you were in Emily's shoes, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments below, and hit the subscribe button for upcoming stories, and check out this best videos playlist.